All right, so this is just horrible. I was going to do part one. I never got to this when they cut the school lunch program. So this is kind of part two of that. It's all the same story. USDA halts millions of dollars worth of deliveries to food banks. Making America great, one cut at a time. The Agriculture Department has halted millions of dollars worth of deliveries to food banks without explanation, according to food bank leaders in 6 states. USDA had previously allocated 500 million in deliveries to food banks for fiscal year 2025 through the Emergency Food Assistance Program. Now the food bank leaders say many of those orders have been canceled. The halting of these deliveries, first reported by Politico, comes after the Agriculture Department separately axed two other food programs, ending more than $1 billion in planned federal spending for schools and food banks to purchase from local farmers. Just to pause for a second. Why would you do this? You, we care so much about farmers, right? This is hurting the farmers. We're all MAGA, right? Make America healthy again. They cut programs that paid local farmers to bring in local produce and products to local schools. Why would you why would you cut that? I got to ask some, Trump supporters watching, is this what you voted for? Like, do you like this? And if you don't, maybe you should speak out about it. And maybe some of you are. I know some are. But this is disgusting. USDA did not respond to multiple requests for comment. The collective cuts are expected to make it more difficult for food banks to meet families' needs, with food prices now 20% higher than they were in 2020, food bank leaders say. Quote, I certainly look at our lines and look at our shelves and say we need some relief, said Joré Novotny, executive director of the Ohio Association of Food Banks, which also reported canceled deliveries with no indication they would resume. For the Central California Food Bank, that means a loss of 500,000 pounds of expected food deliveries worth $850,000 just for April through July, according to co-CEO Natalie Caples. Kathy Kanefsky, president of the Food Bank of Delaware, said between 20 to 24 full truckloads of food were canceled for the next 4 months. The money that was clawed back across the three programs came from the Commodity Credit Corporation, a New Deal era fund that gives USDA flexibility to prop up farmers facing natural disasters or adverse market conditions. The Emergency Food Assistance Network gets its funding from a mix of money from the Farm Bill and through commodities USDA purchases. But the patchwork funding system has left the program unable to meet increasing hunger needs, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent years of food inflation, anti hunger advocates say. The Biden administration responded to the demand on food banks by supplementing the emergency assistance funding with roughly 2 billion from the CCC fund in 2022 and 2023, then the additional 500 million in 2024. But the Republicans have argued that President Joe Biden used the CCC money for climate and nutrition initiatives that are outside the congressional mandate of the fund. Many of the organizations that rely on funding from the Emergency Assistance Program were also receiving funding from the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement, one of the other food programs USDA axed recently. And just to pause again for a second. Okay, so assuming that's true, that money was allocated for climate and nutrition initiatives, one, I'd like to know what that means to these fruitcakes. Two, these are people who just lied about returning the astronauts having been withheld by the previous administration. So I wouldn't believe anything they say without seeing the hard evidence. And three, assuming exactly what they're saying is true, well, you go in and you cut specifically with a scalpel. They're just running around and just trashing all public support for the poor and for people who are struggling. And where they can't do that, they're firing so many people that it cripples the organization so that people can't get the aid that they might be qualified for because there's nobody to process their claims, as we demonstrated with their plan to cut the phone service for identity verification and Social Security. So just to finish here, the clawbacks come as Congress is weighing shrinking the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which helps 40 million low-income Americans afford food. That could further exacerbate the pressure on food banks, which provide just one meal for every 9 that SNAP supplies. Quote, "We're not intended to be a frontline grocery store, and unfortunately, we are that for more people than ever before," said Novotny. If the cruelty is not the point, what is the point? Well, actually, we'll get to that. So, just a few comments here. My local food bank that only feeds 20,000 families lost 15K in monthly USDA funding because helping people eat is no longer a priority. Truly a victory for government efficiency. Congresswoman Valerie Fouché. This is heartless. Programs that help farmers sell food to schools are a win-win. Kids can have fresh food while farmers maintain demand. Cutting these programs will place a $660 million burden on schools across the country when many are already struggling. Tax breaks for corporations, austerity for the citizens. USDA cancels $1 billion in local food purchasing for schools and food banks. And on that score, just to remind you once again, Trump's tax proposals in 2026 include altogether over $700 billion in tax cuts. Over $700 billion. I thought the country's going broke. I thought the country's going broke. Everybody has to tighten their belts. Over 700 billion. Who gets most of it? The richest 20%. The richest 20% gets 68% of it. The next richest 20% gets another 17. Wow, man. So what you got? You got 15% of that left over for the bottom 60%. But we covered
Yep.
this. The bottom 1%, this tax cut is worth $20 a year to you, approximately $20 a year. So that is what this is all about. They are just cutting everything for people in order to hoard more money. It is exactly what Marx predicts in late stage capitalism, that eventually the capitalists with nothing left to loot are going to loot the treasury. That's what they're doing. They're going in there and looting the treasury, and they're getting some people to cheer for it. Oh yeah, no, that's federal worker, not the billionaire, not the corporate multinational corporation that pays no taxes. They're not the ones who are ruining your life. It's some guy who processes claims at the Social Security office. That guy's ruining your life. The person at the food bank. That's the sponge. Not the person like Elon who's built his businesses off tax breaks and corporate subsidies. That's not the guy who's sucking money out of the system. That's not the dependent sucking off the teat of the federal government. It's the people at the food banks who can't afford food, whose prices, as anyone knows, have exploded over the last 5 years. Um, it's time for people to start to put this together. Keynes said decades ago that by eventually productivity was going to grow so much that people would only need to work 15 hours a week. Um, they did a study examining what people working in offices do. On average, they work about 15 hours out of that 40 hours
Right.
doing real work. So put this together. What Keynes predicted is right. They're doing in 15 hours what people used to do in 40 hours. The thing is, under a capitalist system, the idea of taking your boot off the neck of the population and transforming in the way Marx predicted that capitalism would eventually yield to a Star Trek kind of communism, where eventually you'd have enough plenty, you'd have enough productivity that people could go self-actualize and live their lives. That would never occur to them because then people would be free. People would be free. You wouldn't have this such a strict class-oriented society. People wouldn't be miserable, and they don't want that. So they want you coming to the office for 40 hours anyway, even though they only really need you for 15. The idea of paying you the same amount, that's just ideologically a non-starter. But now, okay, so take it to the next level. All right, so now you invent AI, and now you really don't even need them for the 15. Okay. So now, if you're coming at it from a humanist perspective where you care about people, where you love people, you're going to think, okay, well, how do we put in place a UBI, universal basic income? This is great. People don't have to labor and toil like they used to. That's what a humanistic person would think if they were at the top of that system. If you're a psychopathic narcissist, what you're going to think is we don't need all these people anymore. We don't need them. Why do we have all these people? We don't need the labor. So how do we get rid of them? Well, let's make it hard for them to get health care. Let's make it hard for them to get food. Let's make it hard for them to not be in poverty in their old age. The lifespan's going to go down. They're exterminating you like a bunch of rats in the attic. That's what they're doing. That's how these people think. You are expendable. You're no longer needed. They want to have a planet where they, amongst themselves, can live in paradise. And, a few plebs as needed, but, much, much reduced.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think at a certain point you have to ask yourself, A, will people notice this, or B, will they care? Will they care? I mean, I think MAGA, I forget what Hedges said, though he put it very, very well. Our friend Anish Shivani has put it similarly too. But, these MAGA rallies are really just collective expressions of despair and of pain,
Right. Right.
right? It really is a death cult. It really
Right.
is. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a jazz funeral, as I said. It's a New Orleans funeral. It's a celebration of the end. I'm not convinced that the people of this country want a great country for themselves again. I don't think Make America Great Again is really an aspiration. I don't think so. I don't buy it at this point. It's just too obvious that it's going in the other direction. Either
Right.
that or the country is just so pathetically stupid to even surprise a cynical bastard like me. There was a poll the other day. What?
You hit it. You hit it on the nose.
Yeah.
Hit it on the nose.
Yep.
These people think like that trucker who tagged Elon about how hard he was working. Daddy, notice me. They think they're gonna get picked by people who have nothing but contempt for people like them.
Maybe some of them
They
do.
think they'll be the winners. It's only the libs who are gonna suffer. It's not
I
them.
think a lot of people are just resigned to a fate and they don't think anything that can be done about it. And so on the way down, they just lash out at a lot of people who are less powerful than them in a desperate attempt to feel more powerful themselves. That's what I think. That's what I think most of this is. I don't think at this point that the American people really want a better future for themselves, a better country for themselves. I don't think that's true. I don't buy that. I don't buy that because in order for me to buy that, I would just have to believe that too many people are incapable of seeing what is in front of them. I think people see what's in front of them and they find ways to process it. And they find ways to process it that give them a certain meaning and a certain fulfillment that they can't get in other ways. That seems to be what this is here. Because what rationale is there for a story like this? How could it be that new poll said 44% of Americans think we're on the right track as a country? You know, the last time polling was that high, right track, wrong track? January of 2004, 10 months into the Iraq War. That was the last time this pathetically stupid fucking country thought, yeah, things are looking up. Less than a year into the Iraq War. Yeah. Yeah. So, it's tough for me to decide which of them is more true or less true. It's obviously a combination of both. But really, you just have a completely broken population.
I honestly believe that because you got to remember, people don't generally think things through; they just go with feelings.
Right.
I do believe that people who subscribe to this collection of criminals leading us today, or ostensibly leading us, I think they do without really, they could never explain to you exactly how that happens. It's just a vague sense that the future will be better at someone else's expense, and they are amongst the people it will be better for. That's their assumption. It's going to be
It's
better for me. You're going to get all the immigrants out, and it's going to be job heaven, and I'm going to do great.
It's possible that some of them feel that way, but I think generally speaking, it is just an expression of rage at people who they blame for the situation that they're in. And the kernel of truth, which makes it a powerful movement, is the fact that a lot of people who they blame, they should blame. You know, their rights to have a certain rage at a political leadership class that has really globalized our economic system and made them pay the price for all of this, right? The learn to code, right? That whole thing. Like,
Sure,
yes, they are
sure,
absolutely correct to have rage at people who put them in that spot, but they also have a lot of misdirected rage at people who are pawns in that game, just as they are, like undocumented immigrants, right? They are pawns in the same game. The same people who globalized their economic system and shipped your jobs overseas, they're the same exact people who facilitated the migration of people from the
right,
south up through the
sure,
border.
sure,
And so to have hatred for the immigrant in that context is completely misdirected, but it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier
right,
to hate on people with less power than you.
right,
And I think ultimately what MAGA is now and what the whole country is now is it is a population of people that knows that the best days are behind us. They know we're on our way out, and they seek and they actually win some emotional gratification in lashing out and trolling people who they blame for this death spiral that we're now in. The ethos of MAGA right now is just to make people they don't like feel bad. That's it. That's
yeah,
literally the whole movement.
yeah, yeah.
There's no,
Make
I'm
people
not
suffer.
convinced, right? I'm not convinced at all that they have any serious political goals beyond that. They exist to troll libs, but not just libs, immigrants, elites, right? Any group who they blame for having done this to them, their goal is simply revenge against them, even if it hurts them in the process. That is the payoff. That's the payoff. There's no other payoff as far as I can see. I'm not convinced if you support this, if you support an action like this, I am not convinced you want a better place to live. I'm not convinced you're invested in a better future for yourself, for your family, or for your friends, or the society around you. I just don't buy it. I don't believe it. I think there's
I,
something
I,
more psychological going on.
yeah, I mean, I would wager most of them would not defend this except in the most abstract of ways. Like, do you know how much money the government wastes? Yeah, man. You know what? I think you're ascribing more rationality and intelligence than I do.
Right.
Honestly, like I feel like people go on emotion and storytelling,
Well, that's
right?
true too.
It's
That's true
all
too.
gonna be better once this happens. It's gonna be a little pain, but we love truck drivers who tag Elon in tweets. We're gonna take such good care of people like that. That's who we're really doing this for. I think you have a lot of people who buy that shit because they just don't even really think about it.
Please clap.